The mafia boss walked into court. "Stop this trial, she'll marry me, not go to prison." The air in the interrogation room tasted of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, a chemical tang that did nothing to mask the underlying scent of fear. Marissa Vale sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white, the cheap metal of the handcuffs biting into her wrists. She was 27 years old, a waitress who spent her days memorizing lunch specials and dodging wandering hands at the diner on 4th Street. She was not a criminal, yet. The detective sitting across from her looked at her as if she were the devil himself. Detective Miller slammed a heavy file onto the steel table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small, windowless room. "We know you delivered the package, Marissa," Miller said, his voice a low, grinding growl. "We have you on camera leaving the warehouse 3 minutes before the raid. We know it was money for the Romano family. Just give us the name of the capo who sent you. Maybe you do not spend the rest of your youth in a cage." Marissa stared at the scratches on the table, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I told you," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "I did not know what was in the bag. Dean told me it was his laundry. He said his car broke down and he needed a favor." Miller laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Laundry. You expect a jury to believe that? You are facing accessory to murder. Marissa, a guard was killed during that botched robbery. That makes you liable." A flashback seized her, vivid and nauseating. She was back in the parking lot of her apartment complex, the evening sun casting long, golden shadows. Dean, her boyfriend of 6 months, had leaned against his battered sedan, flashing that boyish, crooked smile that had charmed her into ignoring his late nights and vague excuses. He had handed her the brown paper bag, heavy and taped shut. "Just drop it at the warehouse on the docks, babe," he had said, kissing her forehead. "My foreman needs these work clothes for the morning shift, and I am running late for my mom's birthday dinner." "You are the best." She had believed him. Why would she not? She had driven to the docks, humming along to the radio, thinking about what she would make for dinner when she got back. She had handed the bag to a man in a gray jumpsuit who barely looked at her. She had walked back to her car. Then the sirens had come, screaming out of the darkness, surrounding her before she could even put the key in the ignition. Back in the present. Marissa looked up at the detective, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "I am innocent," she said. "Dean used me." Miller leaned in, his face inches from hers. "Dean is gone. Marissa vanished, and you are the one left holding the bag." 2 days later, Marissa sat in a small, glass-walled meeting room with a public defender named Arthur Evans. He looked as tired as she felt, his suit rumpled, a mustard stain on his tie. He barely looked at her as he shuffled through his paperwork. "Here is the reality." "Miss Vale," Evans said, rubbing his temples, "the district attorney is pushing for a maximum sentence. They want to look tough on organized crime, and right now, you are the only face they have attached to the Romano case." "I am not attached to them," Marissa insisted, her voice rising. "I have never even met Romano." "It does not matter," Evans said flatly. "The optics are bad. They are offering a plea deal. You plead guilty to a lesser charge of facilitation, and you do 10 years. With good behavior, maybe you are at 7, 10 years? Marissa felt the blood drain from her face. "I did not do anything. If you go to trial and lose, which you likely will, you are looking at 25 to life," Evans said, finally meeting her eyes. His gaze was not unkind, just defeated. "Take the deal, Marissa. It is the only life raft you have." "I will not do it," she said, the words coming out before she could process the terror behind them. "I will not admit to something I did not do. I will fight." Evans sighed, closing his folder. "Then God help you." On the other side of Grayston, in a penthouse office that overlooked the sprawling, rain-slicked city, Lorenzo Romano stood by the floor-to-ceiling window. He was a man who commanded silence simply by entering a room, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a suit that cost more than Marissa Vale made in a year. He had eyes the color of obsidian, dark, unreadable, and sharp. Behind him, his capo, Luca, stood at attention. "Are you sure?" Lorenzo asked, his voice deep and smooth, like gravel shifting under a current. "I am sure." "Boss," Luca replied, "the girl is a nobody, a waitress. She has zero connections to life." Dean, the low-level runner who skipped town, set her up to carry the cash so he could skim off the top and run. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. Lorenzo turned, his expression tightening. The Romano family did not trade in innocent blood. They were criminals. Yes, operating in the shadows of the law. But Lorenzo held himself to a code. They preyed on the greedy, the corrupt, and the dangerous. They did not ruin the lives of waitresses who were trying to do a favor for a boyfriend. "The police are squeezing her?" Lorenzo asked. "Hard." Luca nodded. "They want a headline. They do not care if she is guilty, as long as they can say they jailed a Romano associate." Lorenzo adjusted his cufflinks, the gold catching the dim light. "Find out when her next hearing is." The courtroom was cold, smelling of floor wax and old wood. Marissa sat at the defense table, feeling smaller than she ever had in her life. The gallery was sparsely populated, mostly by bored reporters and a few retirees who watched trials for entertainment. She kept her head down, afraid that if she looked up, she would crumble. In the back row, hidden within the shadows of the overhang, Lorenzo Romano watched. He had bypassed security with a subtle nod to a guard on his payroll and slipped in unnoticed. He studied the woman at the defense table. She looked fragile. Her posture hunched as if trying to disappear into her oversized orange jumpsuit. Her hair, a soft chestnut color, was pulled back in a messy knot, revealing the curve of a slender neck. But when the prosecutor began to speak, listing the accusations against her with venomous theatrics, Lorenzo saw her straighten. She lifted her head, her jaw set in a hard line. She was terrified. He could see the tremor in her hands, but she possessed a quiet, defiant dignity that intrigued him. Most people in her position would be weeping or begging. Marissa Vale simply endured, her eyes burning with a refusal to be broken. "She is telling the truth," Lorenzo murmured to himself. He stayed until the bailiff led her away, her wrists once again bound in steel. As the heavy oak doors swung shut behind her, Lorenzo made a decision. He took out his phone and dialed a number. "Get me a meeting with her," he ordered, "tonight." The holding cell was a concrete box, stripped of color and comfort. Marissa curled on the thin mattress, staring at the graffiti scratched into the wall above her head. The bravado she had summoned in the courtroom had evaporated the moment the cell door clanged shut. Loneliness washed over her, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. She had no parents to call. Her mother had passed when she was 18, and her father had left long before that. She had no siblings. Dean had been the first person in years she had allowed herself to trust, and he had destroyed her life for a bag of cash. She buried her face in her hands, a sob escaping her throat. She was going to prison for the rest of her life, and there was no one in the world who cared enough to stop it. The sound of the heavy door unlocking made her jump. She wiped her face hastily, sitting up as a guard stepped aside to let a man enter. It was not her public defender. The man who walked in seemed to suck all the air out of the small room. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his dark hair swept back, his presence radiating a kind of controlled power that made the hair on her arms stand up. He carried a leather briefcase, but he did not look like any lawyer she had ever seen. He looked like a wolf dressed in silk. "Marissa Vale?" he asked. She stood, backing away until her legs hit the edge of the cot. "Who are you?" "My name is Lorenzo," he said, omitting his surname. "I am here to offer you legal assistance." "I have a lawyer," she said, though her voice wavered. "You have a public defender who is already writing your concession speech," Lorenzo replied calmly. He set the briefcase on the small metal table but did not open it. He remained standing, watching her with an intensity that made her flush. "I am offering you an alternative." Marissa narrowed her eyes, her instinct for self-preservation flaring. "Why? Why would you help me? I do not have any money. I cannot pay you. I do not want your money," Lorenzo said. He took a step closer, and the scent of expensive cologne and rain drifted toward her, overpowering the smell of bleach. "I know you are innocent, Marissa. I know Dean set you up." Her breath hitched at the mention of her ex-boyfriend's name. "How do you know that? Are you with the police?" "No," Lorenzo said, a shadow crossing his face. "I am the reason you are in this mess. Or rather, my business is—" The realization hit her slowly. "You are one of them," she whispered. "You are with the Romanos." He did not deny it. He simply held her gaze, his dark eyes searching hers. "The police want a conviction. They do not care about the truth. I do. My family does not hide behind women. What happened to you is an insult to me." Marissa should have been terrified. She was standing in a locked room with a high-ranking member of the crime family she was accused of aiding. But looking at him, she did not feel the cold dread she felt around Detective Miller. She felt something else, a strange, magnetic pull toward the only person who had looked at her and acknowledged her innocence. He was dangerous. She could see it in the way he stood, balanced and ready, in the hardness of his jaw. But he was not dangerous to her. "I do not trust you," she said, though the bite was gone from her tone. "Good," Lorenzo said softly. "You should not trust anyone right now. But I am the only one who can get you out of here." He moved closer again, and the space between them charged with a sudden, electric tension. Marissa looked up at him, seeing the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the unexpected depth of emotion in his gaze. He was a criminal, a monster according to the news. Yet he was standing here, offering her a lifeline when the rest of the world wanted to bury her. For weeks, she had been treated like an object, a piece of evidence, a number. Lorenzo looked at her like she was a woman. "I am scared," she confessed, the words tearing out of her before she could stop them. "I am so scared I cannot breathe." Lorenzo's expression softened, the mask of the crime boss slipping for a fraction of a second. "I know," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "I will not let them take you. Marissa, I give you my word." The promise hung in the air, absolute and heavy. Marissa looked at his mouth, then his eyes, the sheer relief of hearing someone promise her safety, the overwhelming need for comfort after days of isolation, crashed over her like a wave. She acted without thinking. She took a step forward and closed the gap between them. She reached up, her hands trembling as they grasped the lapels of his jacket, and she pressed her lips to his. It was a kiss born of desperation, of fear, and of a sudden, blinding attraction to the man who stood between her and the abyss. Her lips were soft, salty with tears, and urgent. Lorenzo went still. For a heartbeat. She felt his body tense, hard as stone against hers. His hands came up, gripping her waist, his fingers digging into the fabric of her jumpsuit. The heat radiating from him was immense. He could have crushed her. He could have taken everything she was offering in that moment of vulnerability. Instead, he pulled back. He did not push her away. He simply broke the kiss, his hands moving from her waist to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears that streaked her cheeks. His forehead rested against hers, his breathing ragged. "Not here," he whispered, his voice strained with restraint. "Not when you are frightened and trapped. I will not be another man who takes advantage of you." "Marissa?" Marissa trembled, shame and relief warring in her chest. She lowered her head, but he tipped her chin up, forcing her to look at him. "I am going to get you out of here," Lorenzo vowed, his eyes blazing with a fierce, terrifying resolve. "I will find Dean. I will find the proof. And when you walk out of those doors, you will do it with your head held high." He stepped back, the loss of his warmth leaving her shivering. He picked up his briefcase, his mask of indifference sliding back into place, though his eyes remained burning hot. "Sit tight, Marissa. The war has just begun." Lorenzo turned and walked out of the cell, leaving the door to clang shut behind him. Marissa stood in the center of the room, her fingers touching her lips where he had been, the taste of him lingering like a promise. She was still in a cage, but for the first time since her arrest, she did not feel alone. Lorenzo Romano's penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel suspended 30 floors above Grayston. While Marissa was being led back to her cell, Lorenzo was shedding his jacket, his movements sharp and controlled. The city lights glittered below, looking like a carpet of scattered diamonds. but his mind was in the concrete box he had just left. Luca, his most trusted capo, waited by the bar, a silent and imposing shadow. Two problems. Luca, Lorenzo said, his voice a low command as he loosened his tie. Find the ex-boyfriend, the one named Dean. Find him, and find out who he is working for. Second, I want our city officials, Detective Miller, the arresting officer, and the assistant DIA. Pushing this case, I want to know where they eat, where they sleep, and who pays their bar tabs. Luca nodded. The DA is Thomas Riker. He's ambitious, looking at a run for mayor next year. Ambitious, Lorenzo repeated, the word tasting like ash. He wants to build his career on the back of an innocent woman. Dig. I want the leverage to bury him by sunrise. Luca moved to the door. And the girl? Boss? Lorenzo turned back to the window, his reflection staring back at him. A man in a suit, a king in a cage of his own making. She is off limits. While Lorenzo's machine began to quietly turn the gears of the city, Marissa was learning the cruel realities of her new home. Her connection to the Romano case, which the DIA had gleefully leaked to the press, had made her a target. In the suffocating confines of the Grayston holding facility, she was not seen as an innocent woman. She was seen as a mafia. The whispers followed her from the showers to the mess hall. That is her. The one who was running money for Romano. She looks soft. Bet she folds easy. A large, hard-faced woman named Jessa, who ran the contraband trade in C Block, cornered Marissa by the library cart. You got a name like that on the outside. You should be paying for protection on the inside, she snarled, getting close enough for Marissa to smell the sour stench of jailhouse coffee on her breath. I am not with anyone, Marissa said, her back hitting the concrete wall, her voice trembling but firm. I am innocent. Jessa laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Nobody here is innocent, sweetheart. You either pay Jessa or you pay the guards, but everybody pays. Marissa was saved by a passing officer who called her name, Vale, legal counsel. She expected to see the slumped shoulders of Arthur Evans. Instead, she was led to a private meeting room where a man in a $3,000 suit stood to greet her. He was older, with sharp gray eyes and a shark smile. Miss Vale, he said, extending a hand. My name is Michael Soloway. I will be taking over your defense, effective immediately. Marissa stared, bewildered. I cannot afford... Your bill has been handled, Soloway said smoothly, opening a pristine leather briefcase. I was retained by an anonymous benefactor who believes strongly in your case. Now, let's talk about dismantling the prosecution's pathetic excuse for evidence. Marissa knew. It was him. Lorenzo had kept his word. The next visiting day felt different. When she was led to the row of scratched plexiglass windows, she saw him sitting on the other side. He was not dressed as a lawyer or an associate. He was just himself, in a dark sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He looked completely out of place, yet utterly in command. Marissa sat, her heart thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She picked up the plastic receiver. They are harassing me, she whispered, the words rushing out before she could stop them. The other inmates, they think I belong to you. Lorenzo's expression, which had been unreadable, darkened. His eyes turned to obsidian chips. He said something she could not hear, a curse under his breath. That will stop, he said, his voice a low growl through the receiver. I will make sure of it. But the rumors are true. Are they not? She asked, a new, desperate fear creeping in. I am only here because of you, because of your family. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Yes, you are here because of my world, and I am here to take you out of it. Why? Marissa pressed, her hand coming up to rest on the glass. It is not just about your code, is it? You looked at me. In that cell? I saw something. Why do you care what happens to me? Lorenzo watched her hand on the glass, his gaze intense. He hesitated, the silence stretching between them. Then, he raised his own hand, placing his palm flat against the glass, his large, scarred hand completely covering hers. The glass was cold, but she felt a phantom heat, a connection so real it made her breath catch. "When I was 20, he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its command. I had a sister, Elara. She was bright. She knew nothing of our life. She trusted the wrong man, just like you did. He used her, and when he was done, he threw her to the wolves to save himself." Marissa's eyes filled with tears, not for herself, but for the pain she heard in his voice, a pain he clearly had not let escape in years. "What happened?" she whispered. "He was connected," Lorenzo said, his eyes unfocused, looking into the past. "The police were on his payroll. The judge was in his pocket. They railroaded her. They called her a liar. She was sentenced to 15 years for a crime she did not commit. She did not last 6 months inside." Marasha closed her eyes, the tragedy of it settling in her own chest. "When I look at you," Lorenzo continued, his voice rough with an emotion he refused to name, "I see the same system, the same animals, trying to do the same thing. I could not save Elara. But I will not let them do this to you. Marissa, I swear it in her memory." A tear slipped down her cheek. She was not just a problem for him to solve. She was a woman he was choosing to save. Lorenz left the jail with a cold, controlled fury. By the time he reached his car, Luca was waiting with a report. "Jessa, the inmate in C Block, has been moved to solitary. Her supply line is cut. The guards on that shift have been replaced." "Good," Lorenzo said. "And Dean, we found him," Luca said, handing Lorenzo a tablet. He was not just running, he was running to someone. He has been hiding in a safe house owned by the Rivera cartel. Lorenzo's blood went cold. The Riveras were his chief rivals, vultures who dealt in human trafficking and drugs, lines Lorenzo refused to cross. He was working with them? Luca nodded. "It looks like it." He skimmed off the top of the warehouse money, and the Riveras offered him protection in exchange for information on our operations. They are the ones who paid Detective Miller to pin the whole thing on the girl, hoping to use her to leverage a deal or start a war. Where is he now? "They are moving him," Luca said. "A van is taking him to a private airstrip. He's scheduled for a flight to Mexico in 2 hours. Lorenzo looked up, his face a mask of stone. That flight was canceled. The operation was silent and swift. The nondescript van carrying Dean was forced off a dark, industrial access road by 2 black sedans. Before the cartel guards in the front seat could even reach for their weapons, their windows were shattered. The side door of the van was yanked open. The action was brutal, but clean, an exercise in professional force. Lorenzo's men moved like shadows. Dean, screaming in the back of the van, was pulled out, a black bag thrown over his head. The entire exchange took less than 30 seconds. There were no shots fired, no bodies left behind, only 2 terrified cartel guards left with a message. "The Romano family sends its regards." Dean was brought to a secure warehouse, one that did not appear on any city map. He was tied to a chair. The bag ripped from his head. He was shaking, his eyes wide with terror as Lorenzo stepped out of the shadows. "Please," Dean whimpered. "I did not—" "You used an innocent woman," Lorenzo said, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "You tried to buy your way out by feeding her to the wolves. I did not have a choice. Miller, they said they would kill me." Lorenzo leaned in, his face inches from Dean's. "This is your only choice. You will tell me everything. You will tell me about Miller. You will tell me about the Riveras, and you will do it on camera. Or I will leave you here, and I will let the cartel know exactly where to find the little rat who squealed." For the next hour, Dean confessed. He detailed the entire conspiracy, from the moment he met Marissa, to the payoff from Detective Miller, to the plan to frame her as a Romano associate. It was all captured in high definition. Back in her cell, Marissa felt a shift. The other inmates kept their distance. The guards looked at her with a new, nervous respect. She was given better food, a new blanket. She knew, without question, that this was Lorenzo's doing. The hope he had planted in her was growing, and it terrified her. Hope was a fragile thing in a place like this, a light that attracted the darkness. That night, unable to sleep, she used the small pencil and paper Soloway had given her for her case notes. She began to write, Not a legal defense, but a confession. Lorenzo, I do not know why I am writing this. I will never send it. It is too dangerous for you to have. I do not know who you are. Not really. The world says you are a monster, a criminal. But you are the only person who has looked at me with kindness in months. You are the only one who has seen the truth. I was all alone. I was ready to die in this place, and then you walked in. You are dangerous, and I know I should be scared of you, but I am not. I am scared of what happens when this is over. I am scared of what happens when you stop looking at me. I am scared that I am starting to hope, and hope is a killer in a place like this. It makes the cage feel smaller. Thank you for making me feel human again. Marissa. She read the words, her cheeks hot with a blush. It was foolish, reckless. She folded the small paper into a tight square and tucked it deep inside the thin lining of her mattress, a secret she would keep forever. 2 days later, she was called for another legal visit, this time. Lorenzo was waiting in the private room. There was no glass. The door shut behind her, the click of the lock sounding untamed. He was standing by the small table, not sitting. He had the video of Dean's confession. It is done, he said, his voice low and intimate in the small space. We have him. We have Miller. We have the D.A. Soloway has the confession. It is almost over. The relief was so sudden, so total, that her knees buckled. Marissa stumbled forward, catching herself on the table. He was beside her in an instant, his hands gripping her arms, steadying her. She looked up at him, the scent of him, that same intoxicating mix of cologne and power filling her senses. The air between them crackled, thick with everything unsaid. He was so close. She could see the fatigue in his eyes, the deep responsibility he carried. You did it, she whispered, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel the solid muscle beneath his shirt, the steady beat of his heart. You saved me. I promised, he said, his voice rough. His hands moved from her arms, sliding up to cup her face, his thumbs gently brushing the skin beneath her eyes. The contact was electric, a jolt that went straight through her. She watched his eyes dilate, his gaze dropping to her mouth. This was not the desperate, frantic kiss from the cell. This was something else. This was earned. Marissa, he breathed, and the sound of her name on his lips was her undoing. He leaned in, slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. She rose on her toes, meeting him halfway, his mouth covered hers. It was not gentle. It was a kiss of restrained fire, of suppressed hunger, of a promise finally kept. His lips were firm, demanding, and yet impossibly tender. He held her face as if she were something precious, something easily broken, while his mouth told her he wanted to consume her. A low sound rumbled in his chest. Marissa's hands clutched the front of his shirt, her fingers twisting in the expensive fabric. She kissed him back, pouring all her fear, her gratitude, and her desperate, newfound hope into the embrace. He kissed her like a man starved, and she realized she was just as hungry. There was a loud, sharp rap on the door, followed by the jingle of keys. "Time is up," a guard yelled. Lorenzo broke the kiss, pulling back slowly. His forehead rested against hers, his breathing heavy. His eyes were closed, as if savoring the last moment. Soon. He whispered against her lips. He stepped back just as the door opened, his mask of command sliding back into place. That night, Lorenzo sat in his car outside the jail, the engine off. Luca slipped into the passenger seat. The cell toss was successful. Boss. He handed Lorenzo a small, tightly folded piece of paper. It was Marissa's letter. Lorenzo unfolded it, his hands, which were always so steady, trembling slightly. He read her words, her fear of hope, her fear of him not looking at her. He had started this to protect his code, to honor his sister, to right a wrong. But reading her secret confession, he realized the truth. This was no longer about his past. It was about his future. He was not just saving Marissa Vale. He was falling in love with her. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked up at the barred windows of the jail. his fist clenching her letter. He would not just get her out. He would tear down the walls that held her. The news came not as a whisper but as a slam. Michael Soloway, Lorenzo's hand-picked shark, stood in the center of the penthouse, his jaw tight for the first time since Lorenzo had met him. Riker panicked, Soloway said, his voice clipped. He knows we have an ex-boyfriend. He knows we have leverage, so he's changing the rules of the game. Lorenzo stood by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass, his expression unreadable. What does that mean? It means he just convinced Judge Harrison to accelerate the trial. It starts in 2 days. Not 2 weeks, 2 days. Soloway, a man who specialized in complex motions and finding loopholes, looked genuinely aggravated. I filed a motion for continuance, citing new evidence, new witness. Harrison denied it in less than 5 minutes. He did not even read the brief. Lorenzo turned slowly from the window, the penthouse lights casting his face in shadow. He is bought. He is owned, Soloway corrected. The Riveras, the cartel Dean was running to, must have gotten to Harrison first. Riker is just the puppet. They are boxing us in. Lorenzo. They are sealing the exits. They plan to have her convicted and sentenced before we can get Dean's confession into evidence. Lorenzo's stillness was more terrifying than any rage, the system he had tried to use. The legitimate path had just evaporated. Find out where Judge Harrison sleeps, Lorenzo said, his voice a low, cold command. Before Soloway could respond, Lorenzo's private phone buzzed. It was Luca. Riker is in jail. He's meeting with her, alone. Marissa sat in the same interrogation room as before, the smell of bleach and desperation thick in the air. This time, however, it was not a detective. It was Assistant District Attorney Thomas Riker, his face flushed with a confidence she found nauseating. "Marissa, you look tired," he said, feigning sympathy as he opened his briefcase. "I am here to offer you a way out. I have a lawyer. You have a mafia lawyer," Riker snapped, his patience thin. "And he is not here. This is your last chance." He slid a document across the table. "A plea agreement, 10 years. Suspended," he said. "You walk out of here today, right now." Marissa stared at the paper. Suspended. She could walk free. What is the catch? No catch, just a formality. You testify. You tell the court that you were a willing participant and that you did it all on the orders of one man. He slid a photograph across the table. It was Lorenzo, walking out of a restaurant looking powerful and untouchable. You tell them Lorenzo Romano forced you. You tell them he threatened you, that you were his mule. You confirm what we all know, and you go home. Marissa looked at the picture. She thought of his hands cupping her face, his voice rough with a promise. "I will not let them take you." She thought of his sister, Ilara. She looked up at Riker, her heart pounding. The thought of lying, of painting Lorenzo as the monster Riker wanted, felt like a deeper betrayal than any crime she was accused of. She would be just like Dean. She would be another person who used someone to save herself. And she knew, with a cold, clear certainty, what the Romanos did to traitors. She would be signing her own death warrant. But as she looked at Riker's smug face, she realized the fear of betraying Lorenzo was stronger. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Riker's smile vanished. "What did you say?" "I said no. I will not lie for you." "You will choose him over your freedom?" Riker slammed his hand on the table, his face turning purple. "You will rot in a cell for 25 years for a man who would not spit on you if you were on fire." Marissa stood up, her legs shaking but her resolve solid. "I am done here." That night, she was jolted awake by a guard. "Medical. You have an appointment." Before she could protest, she was being marched down the sterile corridors, not to the infirmary, but to a processing bay. A black car was waiting. "Do not ask questions," the guard muttered, unlocking her cuffs. "Just get in." Marissa's heart hammered in her chest. Was this it? Was she disappeared? The door opened. She was pushed inside. The car sped off. The man in the passenger seat turned. It was Luca. The car drove for 15 minutes, pulling into the underground garage of a private medical clinic. Luca led her to an elevator, up to a plush, silent office. He opened the door and stepped aside. Lorenzo was standing inside, not in a suit, but in dark trousers and a black Henley that clung to his shoulders. The sight of him, free and real, made her knees weak. She ran to him. She did not stop to think. She slammed into his chest, her arms wrapping around his waist, burying her face in his shirt. He was solid, warm, and he smelled like the night air. His arms came around her, crushing her to him, his hands tangled in her hair, holding her head against his heart. "They moved the trial," she whispered, her voice muffled. "Riker offered me a deal. He wanted me to testify against you." "I know," Lorenzo said, his voice a low rumble. "And you refused. You knew?" "I know everything," he said, pulling back just enough to look at her. The fear and adrenaline crashed over her. "Lorenzo, they are going to convict me." "I know they are." "Soloway said the judge is bought. Please," she begged, her hands gripping the front of his shirt. "Do not do anything dangerous. Do not get hurt because of me." He stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw not just her fear for herself, but her fear for him. He cupped her face, his hands rough and warm against her cold skin. His thumbs traced the curve of her cheekbones. "I will burn this city down before I let them cage you," he promised, his voice raw with an intensity that vibrated through her. As he looked at her, his resolve hardening, his past rose up to meet the present. He was 12 years old again, standing in his father's study. His father, Antonio, had been a man of cold, precise violence. He had placed a hammer on the desk. "Fear is a tool, Lorenzo," his father had said. "Like this hammer, you can use it to build an empire, or you can use it to destroy everything in your path. A man must choose." For 15 years. Lorenzo had used fear to build. He had controlled his world through power, reputation, and the threat of violence. When his sister, Ilara, had died, he had used that hammer to destroy. He had avenged her, tearing down the men responsible, but it had been a hollow, cold victory. Now, looking at Marissa, at the soft, terrified strength in her eyes, he felt his father's lesson shift. He did not want to destroy, and he did not want to build an empire. He wanted to protect. For the first time, the power he wielded was not for control or for vengeance. It was for her. He looked at the guard, a man on his payroll, waiting by the door. "Wait in the car." The guard nodded and left. The room was silent, save for the sound of their breathing. "I am not taking you back," Lorenzo said, his voice rough. "Not tonight. You will not spend your last night before this farce in that concrete box." "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Home." His penthouse was a different world. It was vast, silent, and clean. The city lights spread out below them like a fallen constellation. Marissa stood in the center of the living room, still in her prison-issue sweats, feeling small and out of place. He disappeared and returned with a dark, silk robe. "The bathroom is through there," he said, gesturing to his bedroom. "Take your time." The shower was scalding hot, the water pressure a luxury she had forgotten. She washed the smell of the jail from her skin, her hands shaking. When she stepped out, she wrapped the robe around her. It was heavy, soft, and smelled of him. She walked back into the bedroom. He was there, standing by the window. He had shed his own shirt. His back was a landscape of taut muscle, and she could see the faint, pale lines of old scars. He turned when she entered. His eyes raked over her, from her damp hair to her bare feet on the plush carpet. "Marissa," he said, and her name sounded like a prayer or a plea. She trembled. Not from cold. She was trusting him, not just with her life, but with the last piece of herself she had left. He saw the tremor. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping just before her. He did not touch her. He waited. "I am so scared," she whispered, looking up at him. "I know," he said, his voice impossibly gentle. He raised a hand, tucking a strand of wet hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her skin, and a jolt of pure, unadulterated heat shot through her. "You do not have to be... not with me." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. He was the most dangerous man in Grayston, and she had never felt safer. She took a step, closing the space between them. She laid her head on his bare chest, her ear over his heart. It was beating, a slow, heavy, powerful rhythm. His arms came around her, one hand spreading wide across her lower back, the other cradling the back of her head, holding her steady. He held her like that for a long time, just letting her breathe. He was warm, solid, real. This was not the desperate kiss in the cell, or the stolen moment in the visiting room. This was a surrender. He lowered his head, his lips brushing her temple. She shivered. "You are cold," he murmured. "No," she whispered. "I am not." He pulled back, his eyes searching hers, asking a question she was finally ready to answer. She rose on her toes, her hands sliding up his chest to rest on his shoulders. She kissed him. It was slow, it was tender. It was a kiss of unsaid confessions. His mouth was not demanding, but receiving, taking what she offered and giving back a profound, steadying warmth he tasted of mint and of a loneliness that matched her own. He lifted her then, as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to the bed. He laid her down, the sheets cool against her skin. He did not release her. He lay beside her, propped on one elbow, his eyes never leaving hers as he slowly, reverently, pushed the silk robe from her shoulder. He traced the line of her collarbone with his finger, his touch so light it was almost a memory. She did not flinch. She did not turn away. She watched him as he watched her. Their bodies connected without words. It was a slow, deliberate claiming. He moved with a restraint that spoke volumes, a control that was entirely for her benefit. He steadied her when she trembled, his whispers against her skin a promise of safety. It was not the desperate, frantic act she had half expected. It was a quiet, profound joining, a silent vow in the dark. It was the only honest thing that had happened to her in months. Afterward, they lay in the silence, her body curled against his, her head on his chest. The city lights provided the only illumination, painting them in shades of silver and shadow. She traced the scars on his chest with her fingertip. One, a thin, pale line just above his heart. Another, a puckered, angry-looking dimple on his side. "How do you keep surviving?" she asked, her voice small in the vast room. She meant the violence, the darkness, the life he led. He was silent for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. He had never thought about it. Survival was not a choice. It was an instinct, a requirement. "I never had a reason," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she had never heard. He kissed the top of her head. "Until you—" Marissa's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time, they were not tears of fear. She was his. He was hers. They were two broken pieces that, for this one night, made a whole. She fell asleep in his arms, to the sound of his heart beating steadily beneath her ear. When she woke, the first gray light of dawn was creeping into the room. He was already gone from the bed. She found him in the living room, dressed again in his armor, a sharp, dark suit, his tie knotted perfectly. He was standing at the window, staring down at the city as it woke up. "Lorenzo?" He turned. His face was hard, the mask of the Romano boss firmly in place, but his eyes were still the man who had held her through the night. He crossed to her, taking her face in his hands. He kissed her, not with the tenderness of the night, but with a fierce, possessive hunger. It was a kiss that sealed his promise. "You stay here," he commanded softly. "Do not leave this apartment, Mighty." "Where are you going?" she asked, her heart beginning to pound with a new fear. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a cold, righteous fury. "I have one final plan in motion. The system failed, so I will do this my way." He kissed her one last time, hard and brief, then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Marissa alone in the fortress, the scent of him on her skin, the fate of both of them hanging in the balance. The rain was a cold, miserable sheet in the pre-dawn dark. Judge Harrison, a man who believed his routines made him untouchable, always walked the 3 blocks from his private garage to his favorite bakery at 5:30 in the morning. He liked the illusion of being a man of the people. He was halfway down the alley's shortcut, his umbrella held low, when a figure stepped from a recessed doorway, blocking his path. Harrison stopped, his heart leaping into his throat, a black umbrella, held by a man in an immaculate suit, tilted up. Lorenzo Romano. Harrison's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth to yell, but Lorenzo spoke first. His voice calm, conversational. "You enjoy the Cayman Islands, Judge?" Harrison froze. "What?" "I do not know what you mean. You should," Lorenzo said, taking a step closer. The judge stepped back, hitting the wet brick wall. "You opened shell account number 477 Bravo with a deposit of $1.2 million, laundered by the Rivera cartel, as payment for the conviction of Marissa Vale. I will have you arrested. This is a fact," Lorenzo interrupted, his voice dropping to a silken threat. "This is a copy of the wire transfer," he said, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket and pressing it against the judge's chest. "And this is a photograph of you meeting with their enforcer at the Grand Hotel 2 nights ago. To confirm the arrangement, Harrison's face was the color of ash. He was shaking. "You are a dead man. Romano. The Riveras." The Riveras overstepped. Lorenzo said, "You, however, are just a greedy little man who got caught. So here is what happens next. You will allow my lawyer, Mr. Soloway, to present any and all evidence he wishes in court today. You will not object. You will not sustain Riker's objections. You will let the truth, as messy as it is, come out." "Or what?" Harrison whispered, his bravado gone. "Or," Lorenzo said, leaning in, "this envelope goes to the press, and I will not have to kill you. Judge, the Riveras will—" Lorenzo stepped back, melting into the shadows as he had come. Judge Harrison, his legs like water, slid down the wall, the evidence clutched in his trembling hand. Detective Miller was halfway through his morning coffee when his apartment door splintered, kicked open off its hinges. Before he could even stand, Luca and another one of Lorenzo's men were inside. Miller reached for his service weapon, but Luca was faster, crossing the room and slamming the detective's hand onto the table, the gun skittering away. "You are a hard man to find, Miller," Luca said, his voice unpleasantly cheerful. "I am a cop. You cannot—" "You are a rat," Luca corrected. Lorenzo walked in behind them, not even breathing hard. He looked around the cheap apartment with disgust. He placed a thick manila envelope on the table. "Inside are photographs," Lorenzo said. "They show you accepting a bribe from a Rivera cartel lieutenant. They show you planting the doctored evidence in Miss Vale's apartment, and they show you, in very clear detail, at a motel you should not be at, with a person who is not your wife." Miller was sweating, his eyes darting between the men. "What do you want?" "You are going to have a heart problem," Lorenzo said, "or a nervous breakdown. You are going to call in sick. You will not be testifying. You will not be answering your phone. You will, for all intents and purposes, disappear until this trial is over. And if you do not, Lorenzo said, pausing at the door, "I will not give these photos to your wife. I will give them to the Riveras, and they will want to know why you were sloppy enough to get caught." Lorenzo walked out. Luca picked up Miller's gun from the floor, emptied the bullets onto the table, and followed him, leaving the detective to stare at the envelope that had just ended his life. The Grayston County Courthouse was a media circus. Marissa, dressed in a simple navy blue suit Soloway had provided, was led through a gauntlet of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. "Is it true you are a Romano mistress? Did you kill that guard? Marissa?" She kept her eyes straight ahead, her hands cuffed at her waist, but as she entered the courtroom, her composure faltered. She scanned the gallery, her heart pounding, searching the rows for one face. He was not there. She felt the blood drain from her face, a cold, sharp sting of abandonment. He had promised, "I will burn this city down before I let them cage you." She thought of the night they had spent, the way his hands had held her, the confession in his voice. "I never had a reason. Until you." Had it all been a lie, a way to ensure her silence, a final, cruel game? She was guided to the defense table, and Soloway gave her hand a brief, reassuring squeeze. "Do not waver," he whispered. Marissa straightened her back, lifted her chin, and hardened her heart. If he had abandoned her, she would not give him the satisfaction of watching her break. She would face this alone. The courtroom was tense. Public opinion was overwhelmingly against her. Assistant DA. Riker began his opening, his voice booming with false righteousness. "We will prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this woman, Marissa Vale, was a willing and knowing accomplice to the Romano crime family." He presented his incontrovertible evidence, bank statements faked by Miller, showing large deposits into Marissa's account, grainy, edited security footage that made her arrival at the warehouse look like a coordinated drop-off. He painted her as a cunning, cold-blooded mule. Then it was Soloway's turn. He was methodical, calm. He called the bank manager, who was forced to admit under oath that the transfers were unusual and forced through without the normal protocols. He called the warehouse foreman, who testified that the camera that supposedly caught Marissa had been malfunctioning all week, and that the footage Riker had was oddly clean. Soloway was unraveling it, thread by thread. But Marissa knew it was not enough. The jury looked at her with hatred. They wanted a Romano, and she was the only one they could get. During the afternoon recess, a firestorm erupted. Phones buzzed in the pockets of every reporter in the building. A blog post had just gone live. Sarah Jensen, Grayston's most feared investigative journalist, had just published her story. The headline was explosive. D.A.S. office. Grayston judge and Rivera cartel implicated in conspiracy to frame innocent woman. The article contained leaked documents, offshore account numbers, and, most damning of all, a full video confession from Dean, detailing how Detective Miller and DEA. Riker had paid him to set Marissa up. When court resumed, the atmosphere was no longer tense. It was electric. Riker was pale, whispering furiously to his aides. Judge Harrison looked green, gripping his gavel so hard his knuckles were white. Detective Miller was a no-show, a fact Soloway happily pointed out. "He has apparently been taken ill. Your Honor, the prosecution rests," Riker spat, desperate to end the proceedings. The judge, his eyes darting to the gallery now packed with furious reporters, cleared his throat. "The defense calls its final witness. Will Marissa Vale please take the stand?" This was it. Marissa's heart felt like it would beat out of her chest. Soloway gave her a nod. She stood up, her legs shaking. She adjusted the jacket of her suit. She felt the eyes of the entire world on her, and she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. She took one step toward the witness box. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open, slamming against the marble walls. The sound was like a thunderclap, silencing the entire room. Every head turned. Lorenzo Romano stood in the entryway. He was not hiding. He was not a shadow. He was dressed in a pristine, charcoal gray suit, his dark hair swept back, his eyes blazing with a cold, possessive fire. He looked like a king arriving to hold court. He walked down the center aisle, his expensive shoes echoing on the stone floor. The crowd parted for him as if he were a biblical plague. Reporters scrambled, cameras flashing, but they stayed clear. Marissa stared, her hand flying to her mouth. A strangled sob caught in her throat. He was here. He was here. He had not abandoned her. He did not stop at the gallery. He unlatched the wooden gate and walked past the bar, directly toward the bench. His eyes locked on Judge Harrison. "Mister?" "Romano," Judge Harrison stammered, banging his gavel uselessly. "This is a house of law. You are out of order. Bailiff, remove this man." The bailiffs took a half step forward and then stopped, unwilling to touch him. Lorenzo stopped, standing in the space between Marissa and the judge. He looked at Riker, who shrank back, and then at Judge Harrison. His voice was not a yell, but it was so full of command that it cut through the chaos. "Stop this trial." The courtroom exploded. The judge banged his gavel, his face purple. "Order, order, I will have you held in contempt." Lorenzo ignored him. He turned, his gaze finding Marissa. The entire world fell away. There was only him. He looked at her, his expression softening for a fraction of a second, and the tears she had held back finally welled in her eyes. He turned back to the judge. "She'll marry me, not go to prison." Gasps, shouts. Sarah Jensen was already typing furiously. Marissa's head spun. "Marry him?" Lorenzo looked back at her, his eyes boring into hers, making a promise in front of the world. His voice, softer now but just as clear, was for her and her alone. You're mine now, and no one touches what's mine." "Order," the judge screamed, his voice cracking. "Mr. Soloway, control your—" Michael Soloway, who had been watching this all unfold with the barest hint of a smile, stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice slicing through the noise, "in light of Mr. Romano's personal interest and the evidence published in the Greyston Globe less than an hour ago, the defense would like to present new, exonerating evidence." He held up a small silver USB drive. "We have a full, unedited video confession from Dean, the man the prosecution failed to find, detailing the conspiracy to frame my client. A conspiracy, I might add, that leads directly to Detective Miller and Assistant D. Riker shot to his feet. "Objection! It is already on the internet, Mr. Riker," Soloway said, his smile turning shark-like. "And I have a copy for the jury." Judge Harrison, trapped by the press, by the evidence, and by the man standing 3 feet in front of him, looked at Lorenzo. He saw the cold promise in his eyes. He knew his career was over. He knew, perhaps, that his life was over. He slumped in his chair, his face slick with sweat. He banged his gavel, the sound weak. Defeated. This court, he choked out, is in recess. The courtroom detonated. Judge Harrison's recess declaration was drowned by a wall of sound as reporters, activists, and stunned citizens surged forward, shouting questions. Cameramen climbed over benches, their flashes turning the chaotic scene into a series of stark, frozen tableaus. Riker, his face a mask of waxy disbelief, was surrounded by his own team, who looked at him as if he were a ghost. The judge, his robes flapping, was already fleeing through his private chamber's door. In the center of the storm, Lorenzo Romano did not move. He was a pillar of calm. He watched Marissa, who was still frozen by the witness stand, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Soloway, ever the professional, was already at the bench, filing the USB drive as official evidence with the panicked clerk. Lorenzo moved. He crossed the remaining space to Marissa, his body a solid wall between her and the frantic crowd. He said nothing, simply placed one hand on her back, a gesture of absolute possession, and propelled her toward the side exit. Luca was there, his massive form clearing a path. "This way, boss." They burst through the doors into a marble hallway, the roar of the courtroom muffled behind them. "Mr. Romano!" A reporter, Sarah Jensen, had anticipated their move and cut them off. "Is this a confession? Is your proposal an admission that your organization had her?" Lorenzo did not even look at her. He kept moving, his hand protectively on Marissa, shielding her. "Soloway will answer your questions. Miss Jensen, he is a very expensive lawyer. He enjoys the sound of his own voice." As they reached the main rotunda, a new set of figures was entering, 2 men in dark, serious suits, flanked by uniformed state police. They were not Lorenzo's. They walked with grim purpose, their eyes scanning the hall. They spotted their target. "Thomas Riker." "Ah," one of the men called out, his voice sharp and official. They brushed past Lorenzo and Marissa, their focus absolute. Riker, who had just stumbled out of the courtroom, looked up, his face slick with sweat. "Thomas Riker, you are under arrest for conspiracy, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice." The click of handcuffs was the loudest sound Marissa had ever heard. It was the sound of her cage door swinging open. Lorenzo pushed her through the final set of doors and into the pouring rain, where a black sedan was waiting, its engine humming. Luca held the door. Lorenzo bundled her inside and slid in beside her. The car pulled away from the curb just as the media horde spilled out onto the courthouse steps. They drove in silence. Marissa watched the city, a blur of wet neon and brake lights, pass by the tinted window. She was still trembling, her body vibrating with the adrenaline of the last 2 hours. She did not know where they were going. She did not care. The car descended into an underground garage, the steel door rolling shut behind them with a heavy, final thud. They were in a different building, a sleek, anonymous high-rise of glass and steel. Lorenzo led her to a private elevator, which opened directly into a sprawling apartment. It was not his penthouse. This place was different. It was modern, clean, and utterly silent. It was a safe house, designed to be a fortress. Lorenzo shrugged off his jacket, tossing it onto a chair. His tie followed. He looked exhausted, the mask of the crime boss finally slipping. "You are safe here," he said, his voice quiet. "No one knows about this place." Marissa walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The rain streaked down the glass, muffling the city sounds. She could see the courthouse, miles away, still lit up like a crime scene. She had been a waitress. She'd been an inmate. She'd been a defendant. Now. What was she now? She looked at her hands, half expecting to see the steel of handcuffs or the grime of her cell. They were clean. They were her own. "It is over," she whispered, testing the words. "It is over," he confirmed, his voice closer. The finality of it hit her. The terror that had been her constant companion for weeks, the fear of a life sentence, of dying in a cage, evaporated, and the absence of that weight left a vacuum so profound that she could not stand. A sob, dry and racking, tore from her throat. Her knees gave way. She did not fall. Lorenzo caught her. He was there, wrapping his arms around her as she collapsed, pulling her tight against his chest. She buried her face in his shirt, the dam of her composure breaking completely. She wept. She wept for her lost time, for her innocence, for the terror of the trial, and for the overwhelming, staggering relief of her freedom. He did not shush her. He did not offer empty platitudes. He just held her. He let her break, his hands stroking her hair, his body a solid, unmoving anchor in her storm. He held her until the racking sobs softened into quiet shudders. He led her to the sofa and sat, pulling her down with him, cradling her against his side. He tilted her chin up, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Then he lifted her hand, the one that had worn the cuffs, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. It was a kiss of fealty, of respect. "You don't owe me anything, Marissa," he whispered, his voice rough. "Not for this. Not for what I did today. You are free. You don't owe me a thing." His words released the last of her fear. He had said marry me in that courtroom, a claim of ownership that had both thrilled and terrified her. Now, in the safety of the dark, he was handing her back her own life. She looked at him, her eyes still wet, her heart aching with a new, powerful emotion. "Then let me choose you freely," she replied, her voice shaky but clear. The air between them changed. It thickened, charged with the pent-up hunger of weeks of fear, of near misses, of stolen moments. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. She met him, her hands coming up to cup his face, her fingers digging into the stubble on his jaw. Their mouths met, and it was not a kiss, it was a collision. It was slow, intense, and ravenous. It was the taste of freedom, the relief of survival, and the desperate burning need of two people who had found each other in the dark. His tongue traced her lips, asking a question, and she answered by parting them, inviting him in. He tasted of power, of safety, and of a loneliness that matched her own. He groaned, a low, animal sound from deep in his chest. His hands moved from her waist, one tangling in her damp hair, tilting her head back, the other spreading wide across her back, pulling her impossibly closer. This was not the restrained, gentle man. This was the man who had torn down the justice system for her. That night, they did not just find comfort in each other. They found a release so profound it bordered on violence. The first time they had been together, it had been a tender, quiet discovery. This was different. This was raw. This was desperate. Their clothes were torn away, a frantic shedding of the last barriers between them. His hands were everywhere, relearning the shape of her, his mouth mapping her skin as if to erase the memory of the jail. She clung to him, her nails digging into the hard muscles of his back, her body arching to meet him. When he finally entered her, a gasp tore from her throat, and she met his thrust, their bodies moving in a rhythm that was both ancient and new. It was a claim. It was a possession, but this time, it was mutual. He held her face between his hands, his dark eyes locked on hers, his expression a mask of raw, unfiltered need. "Marissa," he growled, the name a punctuation, a mark of ownership. She cried out, a broken, beautiful sound. Tears streamed from her eyes, not of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated release. To hear her name, spoken by him, in this moment of total surrender, was to be remade. She was not Defendant Vale. She was not the inmate. She was Marissa. She was his. He held her for hours afterward, their sweat-slicked bodies tangled in the sheets. The storm outside had passed, and the city was quiet. Marissa woke to the smell of coffee and the feeling of sunlight on her face. She was in a massive bed, tangled in sheets so soft they felt like water. She sat up, clutching a sheet to her chest, and saw him. He was standing by the window, a coffee cup in hand, already dressed in dark trousers and a clean shirt. He was watching the morning news on a muted television. A photo of Riker in handcuffs was on the screen. He turned, as if sensing her gaze, and a small, rare smile touched his lips. "Good morning," he said. "Is it real?" she asked, her voice raspy. He walked over to the bed, sitting on the edge. He handed her his coffee cup. She took a sip, the heat and bitterness a welcome shock. "It is real," he said. He took her hand, his thumb stroking the pulse in her wrist. "What I said in that courtroom. It was a tactic. It was the only way to stop the trial cold, to claim you in a way the law would have to acknowledge." Marissa's heart faltered. She had known it, but hearing it still stung. He saw the flicker in her eyes and his grip on her hand tightened. But the words were true. "Marissa," he said, his voice dropping, his gaze intense and serious, "I am proposing to you, for real, not to protect you, not to save you from a trial, because that's over. I am asking you to marry me because I don't want a life without you. I am asking because I went to war yesterday, and I realized I wasn't just fighting for you. I was fighting for myself." Marissa stared at him, her heart pounding. This was it, the real question, and a new, cold fear crept in. "Lorenzo." She hesitated, pulling her hand back. She stood up, wrapping the sheet around her. I love you. I do. But your world, that courtroom, the things Soloway had, the things you did to the judge, to Miller, that is your life. I just got out of one cage. I am afraid." She did not have to finish. He understood. He stood and walked to her, stopping a few feet away. He did not try to touch her. He gave her the space to be afraid. "My world is violence. Marissa, I was born into it," he said, his voice flat, honest. "For years, I used that power to build, to control. When my sister died, I used it to destroy. But when I met you, something changed. I do not want to just destroy. I want to build something new, something clean." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading with her to understand. "I am building a different legacy. Marissa, I promise I will protect you, but I will do it without pulling you into my darkness. You will never have to see that side of me again. You will only have me." A small beep interrupted them. It was coming from her ankle. She looked down. Tucked under the hem of the sheet, she was still wearing the bulky ankle monitor from her short-lived house arrest, the last chain. A knock on the door, and Luca entered, his eyes respectfully averted. "Boss, Soloway sent this." He placed a small plastic tool on the table and left. Lorenzo picked it up. "The charges were officially dropped this morning. You are a free woman." He knelt in front of her. Marissa looked down at the man who had toppled for her, now on one knee, not with a ring, but with a tool to set her free. He looked up. "Let me take this off." Marissa put her hand on his shoulder. "No," she whispered. "I will." She took the tool from him. He stood back, her hands shaking. She worked the plastic key into the lock. It was awkward, difficult. She fumbled, frustrated, a tear slipping down her cheek. Finally, she heard a loud, satisfying click. The heavy plastic monitor split open. It fell to the thick carpet with a dull, heavy thud. Marissa stared at it, the last ugly piece of her nightmare. She kicked it away. She was barefoot. She was free. She looked up at Lorenzo. He was watching her, his heart in his eyes. She did not run. She walked. She stepped barefoot out of the metaphorical chains and into his arms, wrapping herself around him. He held her, his face buried in her hair, his arms like steel bands. He was her safe house. The courtroom felt alien, the air, which for weeks had been thick with Marissa's fear and the scent of old, prejudiced law, was now light. The gallery was packed, but the faces staring at her were no longer hostile. They were sympathetic, eager. She sat at the defense table, but she was not a defendant. This was a formality, a final hearing to expunge her record. The new judge, a stern-faced woman brought in to clean the house, read the declaration with brisk efficiency. All charges against Marissa Vale are hereby dropped, with prejudice. This court finds that Miss Vale was the victim of a malicious conspiracy, and we offer her this city's most profound apology. Her record is sealed and expunged. She is, in the eyes of the law and this city, completely innocent. A wave of applause and cheers erupted from the gallery. Sarah Jensen, the reporter, was smiling, clapping along with the citizens who had once wanted Marissa jailed. Marissa felt Michael Soloway pat her back. "Go on, Marissa, you are free." She stood, her legs feeling strangely steady. She turned, not to the judge, but to the crowd, and for the first time, she did not feel small. She had survived. She walked down the center aisle, the same path she had been dragged down in cuffs, the same path Lorenzo had strode down like a conqueror. The crowd parted for her, but this time with respect. She pushed through the heavy oak doors. The hallway was empty, the media horde having been relegated to the front steps. She walked, her steps echoing on the marble, toward the rectangle of bright afternoon sunlight. And there he was. Lorenzo stood at the top of the courthouse steps, his back to the sun, his hands in the pockets of his dark suit. He was not in the shadows. He was waiting for her, in plain sight, for the entire world to see. The cameras were flashing, reporters shouting his name, but he did not look at them. His eyes were only on her. Marissa stopped, her heart catching in her throat. He had come for her. He had torn down the walls of her prison, and now he was waiting to walk her into the sun. She ran the last few feet. She did not throw herself at him, but came to him, her hands finding his, her fingers lacing with his. He pulled her close, his other hand cupping her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. He did not care about the cameras, about the shouting. "It is done, Mia Cara," he whispered, his voice for her alone. "It is done," she breathed, leaning her forehead against his. He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that was not about passion, but about promise. It was a kiss of arrival. The world erupted around them, but they were the quiet center of the storm. 2 nights later, in the private dining room of Grayston's most exclusive steakhouse, Lorenzo sat across from a man whose face was a map of ruthless ambition. Hector Rivera, the head of the cartel that had nearly cost Marissa her life, stirred his drink, the ice clinking softly. His 3 bodyguards stood like statues in the corners of the room. Luca stood behind Lorenzo. "You have nerve. Romano," Rivera said, his voice a gravelly monotone. "Calling this meeting, you cost me 2 men, a judge, and a very lucrative arrangement with the You overstepped," Lorenzo replied, his voice just as quiet, his hands resting on the table. He was unarmed. "You tried to use an innocent person to start a war. You brought this filth to my city and put her in the crossfire." Rivera laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Your city? Your filth? Do not preach to me about morality, Lorenzo. We are the same. You and I. We are businessmen." "We were," Lorenzo corrected. He leaned forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "But something has changed. I am not here to negotiate territory. I am not here to discuss new arrangements. I am here to deliver a message." Rivera's eyes narrowed, his hand stopping its motion. "Grayston is no longer open for your kind of business. Not your drugs, not your trafficking, not your bribes," Lorenzo stated. "It was not a request." "Or what?" Rivera sneered. "You will go to war with me. You, alone? I have an army. You are just a man." "That is where you are wrong," Lorenzo said, his gaze so cold, so steady, that Rivera's smile faltered. "You are looking at me like I am the same boss you knew a month ago. That man was fighting for territory, for money, for power." Lorenzo's eyes flicked to the window, to the city beyond, and then back to Rivera. "That man is gone," he said. "The man sitting across from you is fighting for his home, for his wife, for his future. You are a businessman. Hector, risk. You know what a man with nothing to lose will do. But do you have any idea what a man with everything to protect is capable of?" A silent, heavy understanding passed between them. Rivera looked at Lorenzo, truly looked at him, and he did not see a rival boss. He saw something far more dangerous. He saw a man who had found a reason, a man who would burn the world to the ground, not for profit, but for peace. Rivera, a pragmatist above all, slowly pushed his chair back. He stood, buttoning his jacket. He had come expecting a war. He had found an absolute, an immovable object. "Grayston is a cold city," Rivera said, his voice tight. "I think my business will fare better in the South." He nodded, a curt, bitter sign of respect, and walked out, his bodyguards trailing him. The standoff was over. Not a shot had been fired. Luca let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Boss, that was the end," Lorenzo said, standing. "Let's go home." The following week, Marissa drove to a small, overgrown cemetery on the outskirts of the city. She held a small bouquet of wildflowers. She walked the rows until she found the simple, flat marker, Gregory Vale. She stood there, the wind pulling at her hair. This was the man who had left her and her mother with nothing but debts and a hollow ache. She had spent years hating him, then years trying to forget him. She knelt, placing the flowers on the stone. "Hi, Dad," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. "I do not know if you can hear me. I do not even know if I believe in that. But I wanted to tell you, I am okay." She traced the cold letters of his name. "I spent so long feeling like I was not worth anything, like I was invisible. I think I kept picking men like Dean because they saw me the same way you did, as something to be used and left behind." A tear slipped down her cheek, but it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. "I am not invisible anymore," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "I met a man. He is complicated, he's dangerous, and he is kind. And he is the strongest man I have ever known. And the craziest part is, he sees me. He sees all of me, all the broken parts. And he is not scared. He did not try to fix me. He just held me." She took a deep breath, the clean, earthy scent of the cemetery filling her lungs. "I am safe, Dad. For the first time in my life, I am safe, and I am loved. I just thought you should know." She stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked away from the grave. Not looking back, Lorenzo was in his penthouse study, but the room was different. The maps of his territories were gone. The ledgers of his illegal operations were in a burn pile. He was signing a stack of legal documents, his signature bold and decisive. Luca stood by the door, his expression one of polite confusion. "That is the last of the shipping fronts," Lorenzo said, sliding a paper to his lawyer. "Liquidate it. All of it." "Boss," Luca finally interrupted, unable to stay silent. "Forgive me, but that is half our income. The docks, the imports. That is the Romano family business." "It was," Lorenzo said, not looking up. "We are keeping the construction company and the real estate. Everything else. Everything that lives in the dark. We cut it loose. But why?" Lorenzo finally looked up, his gaze clear. "Because I am building something else." He pushed the final document across the desk. "File this. It is the charter." Luca picked it up. He read the title. "The Marissa Vale Foundation for Justice." "It is a non-profit," Lorenzo explained. "It will provide private legal defense for wrongfully accused women. The money from the liquidation, all of it, will be its endowment." Luca stared at him, finally understanding. This was not an abdication. It was a redirect. Lorenzo was still a king, but he was changing his kingdom. She did this, Luca said quietly, a statement of fact. No, Lorenzo said, standing and walking to the window. She did not ask me to do any of it. She just made me want to. Their wedding was not in a grand cathedral. It was in the penthouse, just before sunset. The guests numbered only 3, Luca, Michael Soloway, and an older woman from the diner, Alara, who had always slipped Marissa an extra piece of pie. Marissa wore a simple, sleeveless white dress, her hair pinned up, her feet bare on the soft carpet. Lorenzo waited for her by the window, the setting sun catching the gold of his ring. He wore a simple black suit, his tie discarded. He looked only at her as she walked toward him. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. He did not wait for the officiant. He lifted her hand and kissed it, a deep, reverent kiss that sealed his vow before he even spoke it. They exchanged simple rings, their words quiet, meant only for each other. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Lorenzo leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "I didn't save you, Marissa," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard. "You saved me." She kissed him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Later that night, after the few guests had departed, he turned on a slow song, the music drifting through the quiet apartment. He held out his hand. She stepped into his arms, her head finding its natural place on his chest. His hand rested on the small of her back, holding her securely. They danced, moving slowly, 2 people in a glass tower overlooking the city that had tried to break them. The world outside was loud, full of sirens and traffic and noise, but in his arms, it was finally, blessedly quiet. He held her, she held him, and they were, at last, at peace. The next morning, they walked out of the penthouse, carrying only 2 suitcases. They did not look back at the life they were leaving, at the city of ghosts and old pains. Lorenzo opened the car door for her, his wife. He got in beside her. He took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers, and drove them out of Grayston toward a new life, a new beginning that they would write together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We hope you enjoyed the journey of Marissa and Lorenzo. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop a comment and say hello. Your thoughts and feelings about the story mean the world to us. Please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of loyalty, danger, and passion. And let us know what you thought of this one in the comments below. We read every single one.